Hello. So, last week I noted something interesting. I noted that I hadn't really talked about a lot of sort of political topics in that previous video, and for the past couple of videos, really. Well, that's about to change. We have we have a lot to talk about in that respect this week. But before I get to that, I'm going to go through some of the basic stuff that I always go through, so characters, themes, and plot. And then we're going to talk about theories of rule and what's going on here with Dalinar and Jasnah. But like I said, before we get to that, let's deal with the more immediate concerns of this particular part of the book. I don't really have much to say about Kaladin this week, weirdly enough, even though this is a very Kaladin-heavy section. I don't feel like there's a lot going on with him in terms of, like, character development. It's mostly just him going through some stuff, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I enjoyed reading it. I just don't have much to say about it. I do notice, actually a friend of mine pointed this out, a friend who's reading this in parallel to me, pointed out that Teft is worse off with Kaladin than he would have been if Kaladin had just let the fused take, not the fused, the Regal take him. Because the other Knights Radiant, the ones that were taken by the Regals, are being taken care of quite well. Of course, Kaladin couldn't have known that at the time. I'm not saying that Lirin was right to reprimand him. He certainly wasn't. I believe that Lirin was abjectly in the wrong in that whole discussion with Cal. But it turns out that through a series of events involving Venli that Kaladin and Lirin could not have known about, it would have been better off for Teft if he had been taken. And this is interesting, because if I'm right about what Cal's next oath is going to be, I predict that what's going to happen is that Teft is going to die. And I think Teft is going to die because Kaladin did what he did. And that's going to make Kaladin realize that him trying to personally protect people all the time is actually not necessarily a good thing, and that he needs to sometimes realize that he might not be the best person to protect everyone. That said, I'm not necessarily sure that's gonna happen. That's just a prediction. I do have a strong suspicion of what the oath is, though, so I would be surprised if that wasn't what happened. Sorry, Teft, I think you're doomed. R.I.P. Teft. But yeah, other than that, nothing really much going on here with Cal, I think. His depression is progressing. He's having nightmares that are being clearly sent by Moash, even though Cal hasn't made the connection yet. He thinks they're just regular nightmares. There's actually more character development, I would say, in this section for Syl than for Cal. So Syl is actually developing a bit of humanity, a bit more humanity, I mean. She is realizing that she is not a constant, eternal entity, that she changes, she grows, she grieves, which it's interesting the way it's framed. I would not have thought of that framing, but it is kind of a good point, which is that the fact that she is able to be sad, to be permanently grieving over her previous Knight Radiant, is kind of just proof that she is capable of change. Which is a positive thing, even though it's obviously a very negative emotion. That wouldn't have occurred to me, but I like the way it's framed here. So yeah, Syl gets a nice little bit of character development. Dabbid gets some interesting development. Dabbid can talk now? Question mark. at least he said the Night Radiant oath, the first one. He said life before death. We'll see if he'll say the rest of them. That would be interesting. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's much super interesting going on with Cal here. I mean, super interesting in the sense that I would want to talk about it. Navani is working with Raboniel, reluctantly. I suspect that the epigraphs for this section might be written by Navani and Raboniel. They're definitely written by a singer and human scientist working together, and I think that's just Navani and Raboniel. I can't think of any other examples of that. So I think that the eponymous in-universe rhythm of war is being written, or has been written, or will be written by Navani and Raboniel. And those epigraphs also revealed that that whole thing is going to end poorly. Like, they're working together, which, yeah, no shit, it's gonna end poorly. Raboniel is an insane, evil, ancient demon thing. Of course it's gonna end poorly. But the actual, like, character development for Navani here is not that, like, she has stopped looking down on herself. She has stopped saying that she's not a real scientist. She does appear to have realized that she is in fact a scientist. I guess she needed Raboniel to push her to that. But more interesting than Navani to me is Raboniel. We find out that Raboniel has a daughter, and that her daughter is also fused and insane, like one of the completely lost insane ones. Which I have concerns about. Specifically, I'm concerned that it's going to be revealed that Raboniel's motivation for everything she does is she wants to cure her daughter. And if that turns out to be the case, I will be pretty disappointed. That's a pretty cliche and uninteresting motivation for a villain, if you ask me. Especially for a villain as potentially interesting as Raboniel. Raboniel is a very fascinating character so far, and I would really hate to see her reduced to such a trope. To basically being Mr. Freeze. So I'm hoping that's not gonna be the case. Her daughter can be a part of her motivations, but I just hope her motives are more grand than just helping her daughter. What else? The actual stuff that Navani and Raboniel are researching is super interesting. So we are now getting into the more scientific side of the Stormlight Archive again. Back in some of the earlier books, I talked about how there was this weird element of quantum physics to the way that Spren work, especially with Fabrials. And now we are getting into some light dynamics as well. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm not very well versed in physics, but we are getting into the talk of light and whether there's actually a conversation between Raboniel and Navani about whether light is a wave, or I don't know what the phrase is. There's a real world debate about whether light is a wave or a beam, I think, like whether it's a wave or energy or something. Either way, that debate apparently exists among Rosharan scientists as well. So science on Roshar in general is shockingly advanced, considering they're like a pre-gunpowder society. It's very interesting. The discrepancy, I would say, between the scientific development on Roshar in different fields. It feels like their theoretical science is a lot more advanced than their actual practical applications of it. Which which might be on purpose. I'm not necessarily criticizing that world building. That might mean something. I feel like Sanderson thinks too hard about the science of stuff to make a mistake like that. So I don't think that's a mistake. I think there's a reason why the practical applications of this incredibly well-developed theoretical science are not there on Roshar, whereas they are there on something like Scadrial. Because it feels like the science of Roshar is in many ways theoretically more developed than Era 2 on Scadrial, but their technology certainly isn't. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Anyway, moving on to the next topic here. Venli. So, Venli is... I don't know how to talk about Venli. The problem with Venli is that I want to say that she is going through a redemption arc, and it kind of is one. But it's more complicated than that. And the reason it's more complicated than that is manifold. First of all, she was a bad person. She did do what she did for selfish reasons, and it did lead to the deaths of her people, which from her perspective is obviously a bad thing. And I agree, it's a bad thing that the listeners are all dead. Obviously, it's tragic. But the issue is, in the final calculus, when you look at the net positives and net negatives of triggering the final desolation, all the negative things that happened, all the death and suffering and destruction, has to be weighed against the fact that hundreds of millions, perhaps billions, of lobotomized slaves were liberated and had their minds restored. And personally, I feel like nothing bad that has happened so far comes close to outweighing that. So as of this point in the story, the net impact, the net moral impact, in my opinion, of Venli's actions is still positive. Obviously, that's not how human morality works. Like, people, like you could argue that Teravangian thinks that way. So I'm not saying that it's good to think that way. But in hindsight, looking at it, it's hard not to argue that it's a good thing that the final desolation happened. But that being said, from Venli's perspective, yes, she absolutely was a bad person who did bad things for bad reasons. Don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing Venli's actions here. I'm just saying that it happened to have a net positive outcome in the end, somehow. But the thing that's really interesting about Venli to me is we're now getting Venli flashbacks finally, and also Eshonai flashbacks, and Venli has been this sort of, like, she was the mastermind behind the return of Odium and the Voidbringers and all that, and she was very much framed as this, like, evil genius kind of character. And ever since we've gotten her POVs, it's been clear that that's not really who she is, but now that we're getting actual flashbacks to the time when she did this, it becomes even more clear that she was a shockingly normal person. The end of the world was not triggered by an evil genius. It was not triggered by some insanely ambitious to the point of villainy monster. It was triggered by a very normal young girl who had a very normal feelings of jealousy about her sister, and also a very normal anxiety about her mom getting dementia. Her motives are not just understandable, but shockingly mundane. Tons of people have felt the way Venli felt. It's a very normal scenario, and Venli just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place at the wrong time, for that to be used by Ulim to trigger the Everstorm. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't expect that. I expected Venli to be a more maniacally evil character back during the time when she was plotting to bring the Everstorm, but no. She's just, like I said, she has extremely mundane motives, and I really like that. I think that's a really, that's a bold but really good choice, in my opinion, on Sanderson's part. And current day Venli, I like that she isn't, like, fully one of the good guys now. Like, she's trying to do better, but she still has these impulses. She has impulses of both selfishness, like when she's talking to Relaine, and she just, like, her first response when he says, oh, you should do this thing that might jeopardize your position in order to do the right thing, her first response is like, no, I can't do that. I can't risk my position for other people. And then he calls her out on it. He's like, for once in your life, stop being selfish. And she understands that. And then, like, she says her first oath, but her oath is rejected because, of course, she hasn't been following it consistently. There's just a lot of complexity to her current position because, like I said, she's gone to the point where she wants to become a good person and a heroic person, but she simply isn't one yet. And she needs to work on herself to get there, which is interesting. Like that's something you don't see a lot, I feel, with redemption arcs in fiction. Usually redemption arcs in fiction are just like, oh, this person realized they were being bad, so now they're good. But it's a bit more nuanced than that here. There's also moments where she's talking to someone and she, like, her first instinct, if they don't show her proper deference, is to be like, how dare you? I'm a regal, you should worship me or something. And then she's like, wait, no, I don't believe that, calm down. So yeah, Venli is becoming one of the more interesting characters in this story now. What else happens here? Let's see. We haven't gotten any Shallan and Adolin. They're still missing in action down in Shadismar, so I don't know what's going on there. Before I talk about some of the more political stuff I want to talk about, let's talk about some plot things. Actually, no, let's talk about Jasnah. Sorry, that was a complete non sequitur, but I just remembered that I want to talk about Jasnah. So, Jasnah is really, really, really interesting in this section. Jasnah does some fascinating things. We get a lot of Jasnah POV. I mean, by Jasnah standards, we never get a lot of Jasnah POV. But we get more than we're used to here. Enough to ascertain, for a start, that I don't think Jasnah has any ulterior motives. I think Jasnah is, which is something I've suspected in the past, but I do think Jasnah is genuinely just trying to do the right thing, trying to save Roshar, which is good. I feel like this story has enough villains. That being said, though, Jasnah is scary. The stunt she pulls to get rid of, I want to say, Ruthar, the High Prince, the stunt where she goads him into challenging Wit, then has Wit declare her his champion, then she kills him, then she has Renarin heal him, and then, like, that whole incredible scene, which I, like, the whole time I was like, Jesus Christ, Jasnah, what are you doing? But I think it was actually a great idea, by the way. Like, I fully support what Jasnah did there. But it was a very drastic measure. And that made me think, if Jasnah believed, as Teravangian does, if Jasnah believed that saving the world was impossible, and that the only thing she could do was sacrifice the world to save a handful of people, I think she would do it, and I think she would do it easier than Teravangian. I think she would find that an easier thing to commit to than even he did. Which is a scary thought, but I do think I'm right about that. I feel like Jasnah is a very pragmatic person. Like, she has a lot of empathy for others. She is not lacking in compassion. She wants to help and save others, but I think she is very naturally pragmatic about it, and she would sacrifice anything if she thought it was necessary to achieve her goals. And considering the position of power she is in right now, and also the fact that she is, as far as we can tell, literally the only fourth ideal radiant on Roshar other than Nail himself. I'm assuming Nail is fifth ideal, I think. Anyway, she is like the highest ranked radiant in existence, other than literally a herald. That's kind of scary that she has, and also a queen. It's kind of scary that she has that attitude. But in this section, I like what she does with it. I like the whole Ruthar thing, and I also like the whole wanting to fight on the front lines to experience what it's like to be a soldier chapter. And I also like that she acknowledges during that chapter that she even then she can't really experience it because she's safe. Like, she knows she won't die. She has Stormlight to heal her, she has Shard Plate, and if push comes to shove, she can literally just teleport into Shadismar. Like, she's not going to die. So she's not actually experiencing what a soldier would experience, because a key aspect of being a soldier is having a very high chance of dying. And she acknowledges that here, but she still tries to experience as close to that as she can, I guess, which is commendable. Let's see, what else? Oh, by the way, Jasnah and Wit. In a previous section, the idea that they might be a couple was kind of played off as a joke, like, haha, the public has these rumors, but obviously we, the readers, know that's not the case. We know that these two are just plotting together. I'm not so sure anymore. Are they a couple? I think they might be. That was a weird chapter. It kind of felt like they were. Certainly they're closer emotionally together than I had assumed. Like, I don't know if they're just close friends at this point. Does Hoyd have those? I don't know. But they're certainly, like, weirdly intimate with each other in a way that makes me think those rumors might be true. And if they are, I kind of love that. I love the idea of Wit and Jasnah dating. That's kind of hilarious. And kind of makes sense, honestly. It would probably make for the most extreme age difference I've ever read, because I think Wit is like 10,000 years old or something. But he doesn't act like it. So who knows? What else happened here? So I'm trying to think if there's anything more I want to talk about other than, like, the big political spiel I want to go on about Dalinar at the end here. Oh yeah, I do want to note, I just want to go through a few plot details. So, I'm pretty sure that one Rhythm of War section, the epigraph, that talks about sand, it says, I am told that it is not the sand itself, but something that grows upon it that exhibits these strange properties. That's Taldane sand. That's sand from Taldane. And if I'm right that Rhythm of War is being written by Raboniel and Navani, I think that the Taldane sand might be the thing that Mraiz gave Raboniel in a little box. I mean, he also gave her Lift, obviously, but he also gave her, like, a little box that she was incredibly excited about. I think that might be Taldane sand. Oh, before I get back to politics, actually, Teravangian, holy shit. Teravangian is such an interesting character. We get a confirmation here in the end that Teravangian, the smart version of Teravangian, is motivated, as Dalinar suspects, at least in part, by a desire for personal glory. He wants to be right, he wants to be the one to save the world. But stupid Teravangian, or I guess I should say nice Teravangian, really, because that's his main characteristic, that he's compassionate and kind. So kind Teravangian actually doesn't have that motivation. So the two different versions of Teravangian, even though their goals align in many respects, have subtly different motivations, which is really, really interesting, especially because they're not really two versions of Teravangian. There are infinite versions of Teravangian. It's a spectrum. So as he moves along that spectrum, I guess as he moves towards the smarter end of the spectrum, he becomes more and more motivated by personal glory and personal credit for saving the world. I don't even think it's credit. I don't think he wants other people to credit him. He wants to know that he was the one who saved the world. Whereas as he moves along the spectrum in the opposite direction, he cares about that less and less. And that's really, really compelling as a character, I think. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Teravangian might be the most complex character in the Stormlight Archive at this point. It's obviously a steep competition, but I think that might be the case, actually, at this point. Anyway, I'll talk more about Teravangian in the future, I'm sure. It's clear that his story is going some interesting places right now. But let's talk about Dalinar. So, Dalinar's politics suck. Dalinar is a great character, and I still maintain that he is a good person, but his politics are atrocious, and that has been the case since Book 1. I talked at length in Book 1 about the issue with Dalinar trusting Sadeas, and how he should not, the fact that he trusts Sadeas for so long kind of condemns Dalinar as a person, because he knows what Sadeas is doing to Dark Eyes. And we see that again in this book earlier, where Dalinar fights against the idea of liberating slaves. He's kind of a Jefferson figure, I would say. Like Jefferson had the whole thing where he believed that slavery was wrong and he believed in freedom, but not enough to actually do anything about it or to not have slaves himself. And I feel like Dalinar's... I wonder if that's actually a purposeful comparison now that I think about it. Is Dalinar : based on Thomas Jefferson? That would be really weird. Brandon, what? Is that what's going on here? Okay, I'll put that aside for now, that weird thought I just had. Here in this section, Dalinar has a couple of really, really wild moments. So, first of all, in the scene with Ruthar, Dalinar is horrified by the idea of a high prince having to work for a living. And so he, gifts Ruthar a home so that Ruthar doesn't have to work for a living or be homeless, even though Jasnah wanted that to happen to Ruthar. You can view this as kindness. I don't necessarily think anyone deserves to be, left destitute or whatever. But I don't think Dalinar would have done the same for someone who wasn't a high prince. I think this was a case of Dalinar's personal class ideology, his class position, making it unthinkable for him for a high prince to be in that position. His fundamental love of the status quo, even as he himself bucks the status quo in so many ways, but on a deep level he respects and loves the status quo. And so his love of it makes him unable to comprehend or to stomach the idea of someone who is high-ranked in the status quo being placed on a low rank. That horrifies him. He's fine with elevating some Dark Eyes, but lowering Light Eyes, that's a horrifying thought to him, because that's a threat to his class position. he doesn't think that way. Like, he's not doing it for selfish reasons, but on some level, that's what's motivating that, I think. And the other thing, of course, is his horror at the idea of checks and balances on a ruler. Like he's constantly talking about how he can't comprehend the fact that Queen Fen and Gox both accept the fact that they have to, like, do what other people say sometimes. He's like, oh my god, what kind of horror is this? A monarch not having absolute authority? And then Jasnah is like, yeah, that's good. Like I'm a monarch and I have absolute authority, and even I recognize that I shouldn't, that it's bad that that's a thing. And Hoyd also has this great line that I like. Let me just find the line from Hoyd. Wait, where is it? It's such a good line. I need to find it. Just a second. I think it's here. Yes. On the topic of monarchs, I will have you know that I find you to be an endearing despot. You're so pleasant, I almost don't find it horrifying that I'm living among a people willing to trust a single man with near absolute power over the lives of hundreds of thousands, while completely ignoring proper checks and balances upon his potential greed, jealousy, and ambition. And, like, yeah, that's horrifying, but Dalinar doesn't see it that way. Dalinar sees it as noble, because Dalinar imagines that the position of ruler automatically imbues you with some level of nobility, of spirit, which of course it doesn't, and he should know that, because of course he's Dalinar, he knows what he's done, and here he is as a ruler now. And also he knows what Gavilar did, and there Gavilar was as king. And Teravangian, and so on and so forth. Like, there are far more examples of terrible absolute monarchs on Roshar, even just now, like current ones, than there are examples of good ones. So, yes, obviously he's wrong and Wit and Jasnah are right, but it's very interesting that Dalinar, who is sort of like the moral rock of the story in many ways, has this issue. And I like that that's being explored here. I like that Dalinar isn't a character who is completely free of the assumptions and limitations of his class position. He's a very flawed character. He's a character who used to be much more flawed, and so it's easy to think, oh, look at how much he's grown, he's become such a good person. But what's more important is how much further he has to grow, just like Venli, which I talked about earlier. Because there is no excuse for supporting an absolutist monarchy. It's a terrible idea. It has always been a terrible idea. There is no good argument for it. And it's really interesting to me to see this happening in a Sanderson book, actually. Because I get the feeling that Sanderson, right now, agrees with Jasnah and Wit. It's pretty clear that Dalinar is meant to be seen as kind of being in the wrong here, I think. But that's not the position that Sanderson has had historically. Sanderson, in most of his work so far, has been kind of a fan of authoritarian rulers, so long as they're the right ruler. This was something I talked about at length in Mistborn Era 1, because it was a major theme there. Like, a major issue in Era 1 was this attitude I sensed from the story of, oh, how much better would things be if these people just had absolute power? Especially, by which I mean in books 2 and 3. In book 1, obviously, that wasn't a thing. And even at the start of Stormlight, like, Dalinar's role in book 1 of Stormlight kind of felt like the message we were supposed to take away from that is, we need a strong leader who will simply be obeyed and who will restore order. And I like that seems to no longer be a position that Sanderson's work is implicitly or explicitly defending. Because I was concerned for a while there of where this story was going, and now I'm less concerned because it's clear that Sanderson has realized that absolute monarchies are bad, and we got rid of them for a reason, actually. So yeah, that's all I really have to say, I think, about that whole topic. I do want to talk about one other thing, which is the idea of restoring the Oath Pact. And I want to go on record right now and say that I do not think that is going to happen. I do not think that is how this story ends. In part because it's being referenced so much, and it would be kind of boring to end the story in a way that's already been predicted by so many characters, but also because I think it's morally untenable. Not just because of the 10 people who have to suffer eternally, but also because I think it's morally untenable for the humans to win this war. This war needs to end in peace, not victory, for either side. Because the only moral way to end this conflict is in a way where both the humans and the singers win, in my opinion. Only Odium individually has to lose, but like, the singers as a collective have to remain a powerful force on Roshar. They have to keep the territory they've gained. I don't think Alethkar is getting restored, to be honest, because I don't think it would be morally acceptable. If it does get restored, it will be a moral compromise on the part of whoever does it. So yeah, those are my predictions for the future, and also my thoughts on some of the interesting politics going on with the different theories of rule from Dalinar, Jasnah, and Wit. I especially like Wit's perspective, by the way, because obviously... Why am I calling him Wit? Hoid. I don't know what to call him at this point. What is his name? Is he Hoid? Is he Wit? Who knows? Sephandrius. There we go. I'm going to fucking dead name Hoid, I guess. No, I'm not. Anyway, yeah, I like his perspective because he's seen so many worlds. So he's like, when he's talking about how these things often go poorly, he's probably actually thinking about the events of Mistborn Era 1. Because he was there. He knows what happened. Anyway, those are my thoughts on part 3 of Rhythm of War. I think I'm getting better at making these into single videos. I'm getting more concise with some of my thoughts, without, I think, sacrificing the complexity of my thoughts. I think. Let me know in the comments, by the way. Do you think that, do you feel like these past few videos have been less in-depth analyses than usual because they've been shortened? I don't think so. I feel like I'm just getting better at being more efficient with my speech and not repeating myself as much. So, I'm going to go and read part 4 now, and I am incredibly excited because things are getting weird. Goodbye, and see you next week. Bye!